Hi there, I'm John Bradshaw from It Is Written, and I want to tell you about how a book changed my life. This is the story of the book that led me to faith in Jesus. As a matter of fact, in a couple of moments, I'm going to show you the actual book. It was late one night, or you might say early one morning, and I was reclining in a bathtub half filled with water that by now was cold. There was no more water left in the cylinder. I couldn't refill the bathtub because I'd been in that bath for some time now, more than an hour, reading a book. The book that changed my life. All right, let's back up. We'll go back to the beginning, and then we'll get to the end of the story. I was raised in a very religious home. I would charitably refer to it as a Christian home, although I don't believe I had a classic personal relationship with Jesus, but certainly a personal relationship with Jesus of sorts. And our home was not a home in which the Bible was read. It's a home, or was a home, in which the Bible was kept. It was kept on a shelf, a big red family Bible that I believe my father ordered from the Reader's Digest. I'm not certain why we had it. I feel like perhaps it was maybe a kind of a good luck charm, a good omen, something one could point to and say, sure, we have a Bible in our home. But it wasn't read routinely or scarcely. It simply wasn't read. Nevertheless, our family was serious about our religious faith. We were in church every single Sunday. I attended our local church school, which was right beside the church and only 5 doors down the road from the house in which I was raised. It was a good standard of education. We were educated by nuns and lay people as well. I was in 4 different classrooms in that school. The first 2 classrooms, lay people taught me. The second 2, the older classrooms, I was taught by nuns. And I would like to believe the standard of education was very good, and it was a school with a good reputation. From a religious point of view, a good religious school. From a Christian point of view, well, there wasn't a lot of the Bible taught. And of course, as a young person, is that the right thing to say? I think as a young person, I didn't have the wisdom or the wherewithal to question the upbringing that I was receiving or my Christian instruction. This was what we believed. This was what we were taught. And so I accepted it pretty much like everybody else. I was quite involved in the church. As a young person, I was an altar boy. I helped the priest not only every Sunday, but therefore quite a good period of time every day by assisting in the Mass in the church service. Ours was not a church in which there were any scandals. We had good priests, as far as I could tell. A couple of them liked to drink rather too much. One of them was a very Pentecostal-oriented, charismatic man. He was a change for our traditional, conservative little Catholic congregation. But a pretty typical church with a good congregation of great people. These were the people I was raised in the very midst of. I still know many of them to this day. Wonderful people, every last one of them. But questions started to come into my experience. Keep in mind, I'm a kid, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years of age. I'm starting to have questions. Where am I going to get answers to those questions? I'll give you an example of some of the questions I wrestled with. As an altar boy, I would go to a funeral, many funerals. At the funeral, the priest would say something like, "We can rejoice and be glad because our dearly departed friend is in the presence of God, praising God." And then we would go to the cemetery, lower the body into the grave, and as the casket was sinking beneath the surface of the earth, the same priest would refer to the same person and say, "Here our friend will lie until the resurrection when Jesus comes to wake the dead." And I was now struggling, trying to figure out how 2 people could be in one person could be in 2 places at the same time. We were taught by the nuns that the unsaved, the wicked, the lost would burn in hell forever and ever. And of course, that is an off-putting notion. That's a challenging, almost traumatizing idea. And there isn't a kid alive who ever heard that for the first time and said, "No, that makes sense." It didn't make sense to me. It absolutely did not. I could not conceive of how this God that we were told loved us would burn someone forever, without mercy, without end. 1,000 years from now, it's like the burning had just begun. It didn't make sense then, and doesn't make sense now. I was encouraged to pray to dead people, to pray to Mary. May was Mary's month in our church. Every August we would celebrate the Ascension, when Mary, or the Assumption as a matter of fact, when Mary was bodily assumed into heaven. Now, we were taught that not from the Bible, but on the basis of the teachings of our church. We would pray to Mary, we would pray to angels, we would pray to various saints of all kinds of backgrounds and names and so forth. And I wondered about that. I wondered as a young person, should I pray to saints, or could I not just pray to God? So, I had a lot of doctrinal confusion, questions that just started raising themselves in my mind. As I got older, the questioning took on a different turn. As I got older, I started to read other books, and one of the books that I was given was a book called The Late Great Planet Earth, written by Hal Lindsey. As I remember it, an expose of how end-time Bible prophecy is going to play out. And I read that book fascinated. I don't remember believing a single thing that was in the book, but I was fascinated. I thought, prophecy, I've never studied that. I don't know anything about that. Here's somebody who's digging into it. What can it mean? I didn't think it could mean that. It just seemed to me that Mr. Lindsay's answers were just a little too neat. And for some reason, I didn't buy it. So now I had doctrinal questions. I had prophetic questions and a desire to learn more about the prophecies of the Bible. I knew they had to mean something really important. And at the same time, what I was missing was a relationship with Jesus. I sort of knew him. That is, I had a friendship with him, but I certainly wasn't saved. There was no way I could be secure in my salvation. I couldn't look anybody in the eye and say, without a doubt, because of X, I am certainly going to go to heaven. If I was asked, I would say something like, I sure hope so. And as a believer in God, to have an I hope so as the very best you can do about salvation, that's really not great. So what would I do? God knew my heart. He knew I was searching. I started to describe myself as a non-Catholic Catholic because I still attended the church, but there were so many of the beliefs that I just couldn't bring myself to believing. I had tried to read the Bible. I had. We would get together, some of my friends from church, and we would pray and sing and even read God's Word, but I didn't really know anything about what it meant. Nothing was presented in a sequence, in a logical form. There was no real meaning for me to take away from the text. So what's going to happen to this young man? Now I'm, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. I told you that a book changed my life and that I'm going to show you the book. Here's what happened. Years before me, one of my older brothers left our church and joined another church. Of course, I was very sad that he was now going to go to hell, but it's what he did. Still loved him, still liked him. And he did something for me. He gave me a book. He said, you might want to read this book. You said you're interested in the Bible. You're interested in prophecy. You have doctrinal questions. Read this book. You might find they answer some of your questions. So I opened the book to the introduction, began on the introduction. I thought to myself, I'll get back to this. And I never did. I intended to, but I never did. 4 years later, my brother lived in another country. 4 years later, I saw my brother again. He said, did you ever read that book I gave you? No, Wayne, I did not. He reached into his bag. He said, here's another copy. I thought that was very generous of him. I said, I will read the book. This time I turned to page 1 and started reading. I must have got half a page into page 1, put the book down, meant to read it, didn't read it. 4 years later, I was living in London, England. I had visited churches in numerous countries now, looking for a church in which I could say, this energizes my faith. I have found God. The Bible makes sense, and I now am confident in my salvation. Never happened. I visited Ireland, the land of my ancestry. I was directed to a certain church. It was St. Saviour's Church in Limerick, Ireland. I was convinced in my heart, convinced I was going to attend the church that would show me Jesus, make sense of the Bible, and take my faith to another level. I went to the church. It was an old stone church. I looked up the front, and there was what appeared to be an old stone priest. I don't mean to be uncharitable, but I looked around the church. There was a scattering of people, maybe 25. I left the church that day convinced I was done. I looked up into the gray Irish winter sky, and I said out loud, God, I'm never going back to church until you show me the truth. Oh, the weight of the world just rolled off me. No longer was I searching, worrying, worried, bothered. This was God's problem now. He knew I had searched. And that's when he intervened in a very direct way. I arrived back to London. I was staying in a suburb called Stoke Newington. The postal code N16 on the north side of London. And waiting in the mail for me when I got back from Ireland was this book. This very book. Now, this one was called Cosmic Conflict. Good and evil wage war for planet Earth. I had written to my brother and asked him, you gave me a book a couple of times. I'm looking for another copy here in London. I had visited secondhand bookstores and so forth. Something about a controversy written by someone named White, I believe. Sorry, sir, can't help you. Nobody knew. But here was this book. What would I do? You can see it's a little misshapen. It got caught in the rain once. I wasn't going to start with the introduction. I had tried that before. Page 1, no. My brother had said it's history and prophecy. Maybe the first half is history and the second half is prophecy. So I turned to somewhere near the middle of the book and I started reading. In this book you will find, I don't know if you can see that, certain passages are underlined, pages are marked. Through the two great errors, the immortality of the soul and so forth. That section is surrounded in red pen. That's before I knew to mark my books in pencil. These devices for the accomplishment. The Lord permits his people to be subjected to the fiery ordeal of temptation, not because he takes pleasure in their distress and affliction, but because this process is essential to their final victory. That impressed me. I marked it in the book as I read. So what I would do is I'd take this book, this actual book, and when everybody else in my apartment had gone to bed, I would stay up and take a bath. I was not working at the time, and we didn't have a shower, at least not one that functioned. The landlord refused to fix it for some reason. So I would run a bath and settle back into the bathtub with my book, and I'd start reading. And I had to have read America in Prophecy, An Hour for Reform, Man's Worst Enemy, Facing Our Life's Record, The Impending Conflict, Can the Dead Speak to Us, Snares of Satan. I read it all. And as I read the book, conviction gripped hold of me. So it did several things. It started answering some of the doctrinal questions. I didn't believe the dead went straight to heaven. I felt like they must sleep until the resurrection. Boom, that's what the book told me. There's no question that wicked people or the lost burn forever and ever and ever. No way in the world. Pray to dead people? No. Can our dead speak to us? That settled that for me. Then it took the prophecies of the Bible and laid them out in order. Oh, that makes sense. Sure it does. I hadn't really read the Bible yet. That would come. The other thing, and maybe the most important thing that this book did for me, is it introduced me to Jesus. Not as a tyrant, not as someone who's mean-spirited, not as someone who wants to get me, but as a friend. It told me that I could get to heaven based not on my goodness, but by receiving the righteousness of Jesus, and that I could receive this by faith. Now, if you've never had this experience of coming out of the darkness into the light, then maybe it's difficult for you to relate. If you've never read a book like this and the lights have all started to come on as you've read, maybe it's difficult for you to get your arms around this. But imagine someone who was lost, someone who was wandering, someone now who had fallen away from church, essentially. I'd stopped attending, really. Imagine that person discovering truth. Life-saving, life-changing. Boy, was it life-changing. Radical, pure truth. I found it. Well, It was always there. Just needed to get from here to here to here and here. My brother sent me a third copy of the book, The Great Controversy. This is a slightly different version. Well, same words, different cover, as a matter of fact. Oh, look at that. You've witnessed history. My book is now starting to fall apart. Now, that's not great. First time that's happened. I'm glad you could be here for that moment. The Great Controversy. Here's what I did. I sat in the bathtub, I looked across the bathroom, and I thought to myself, this very book. I thought, this is going to change my life. I won't be able to go back to my old career anymore. I was a radio broadcaster. A paid fool is really what I was. I can't do that. I need to do something meaningful. What will I tell my family? What will my friends think? What will I do with the rest of my life? And I thought the solution would be to take the book and throw it across the bathroom. I picked my spot where the floor met the wall. Boom, I throw it right there. At 1:30 in the morning, probably wake somebody up. But I thought to myself, if I do that, it won't change the truth. I believed God was speaking to me. And so, late that night, early that morning, in a bathtub in North London, I bowed my head and prayed to God and said something like, thank you for showing me the truth. Okay, we'll do it your way now. Years before, my brother had pointed out to me that the seventh day was the Sabbath. That was important to me. He showed me on a calendar that my own father brought home from church. He got the Columban calendars every year. I knew I was going to have to go to a church that kept the 7-day Sabbath. I knew I'd not have to. I would because I wanted to. It was a big change in my life, but I wanted to. The next day, I went to the living room, picked up the phone, dialed, 0, I don't remember, called the operator. And I said, could you please give me the number for the Seventh-day Adventist Church? And you could say, that's where the story began. But that beginning began a little further back. When I picked up this book, read it from the middle to the back cover, then I went back and started from the front. I've read it many times. I'm about to begin reading it again. It's a life-changing book filled with the message that God has for us today. So let me say this in conclusion. What God did for me, He's doing for others. What my brother did for me in sharing this book with me, you and I can do for others. God said that the everlasting gospel is going to go to earth's remotest bounds, to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. And a significant way that that is going to happen is via the printed page, through books such as The Great Controversy. If you can share this book with somebody and you prayerfully believe that this would be a blessing to them, don't wait, share the book. If God impresses you, this book is what somebody needs. And I would ask you to be prayerful about that, but if God impresses you, don't hang back. Instead, share that book. Here at It Is Written, we just received another shipment of 25,000 copies of The Great Controversy. The last 35,000 copies sold out. I believe in this book, in sharing this book. It led me to faith in Jesus and faith in the Bible. And it'll do that for countless other people before Jesus returns. I encourage you, read The Great Controversy. Share The Great Controversy and books just like it. Point people to the Bible. Lead people to Jesus. Before we know it, the sky will split wide open. Jesus will come riding down the great corridors of space. He'll gather us together and we'll go home to be with Him forever. My prayer is that that day will come soon. Thanks so much for your time, and may God bless you.